Well, good evening, and thank you for coming today. Before we get started, last week was 4th of July, and what an awesome opportunity not only to celebrate 4th of July, and then this week to celebrate with the Coast Guard. So definitely, if there's any veterans in the crowd, if you wouldn't mind standing up so we can recognize them for their service to our country. Thank you. And that is because this is what I love to do, is bring history to life. And because of you guys and gals in your service, you know, I'm able to do that, to be a teacher, to do what I love to do best. So again, it's great to see everybody. And today we have an amazing opportunity to bring history to life with our special guests. We have Matt Maske, Anita Maske, her married name, and Maske, and then Michael Tougias. And I know many of you have read the book, or you've seen the movie, or even both. And again, bringing one of the most daring rescues in history of the Coast Guard, if not the most daring, to life. A crew of 4, Bernie Weber, Richard Leslie, Andy Fitzgerald, and Ervin Maske, risked their lives to save 33 men stranded at sea on the SS Pendleton in the middle of a devastating nor'easter. And as the motto of the Coast Guard goes, always prepared. These men used all their training, all their experience, and every bit of instinct to combat the 60 to 70-foot waves, hurricane-force winds, freezing temperatures, and maneuver a 36-foot boat that could safely hold 12 to complete this mission. Their selfless act and service saved the lives of those on the Pendleton and have inspired many, many more to join the Coast Guard and serve and protect our country. Truly amazing. Our first guests, Matt and Anita, son and daughter of Ervin Maske, they are here today, and they have made many, many hours to travel. Anita from Eau Claire and Matt from Marinette. Matt has made the trip from Marinette, Wisconsin, where he works at Samuel Pressure Vessel Group. He's a proud family man, is deeply involved in his kids' lives and community activities. Matt is a coach for a youth baseball team. He's also the vice president of the Marinette High School Booster Club, and serves on the Marinette Youth Baseball Board of Directors. He has again taken his time out of his day and schedule to meet with students this morning at NTC, not only from Wausau, but Edgar and the Alternative High School. As I said, Anita comes from the other side of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, where she works for the Mayo Health Care Systems, where she is a med tech. She also wears the hat of a teacher as she teaches classes at Chippewa Valley Technical College. And when she is not doing all of that, she is a wonderful mother for her 2 children and her 2 grandchildren. Our last guest, Michael Tougias, is a New York Times best-selling author and co-author of 24 books. He is best known for his 7 survival at sea books, such as A Storm Too Soon, So Close to Home, and The Finest Hours, which again was made into a motion picture by Disney. His book, 10 Hours Until Dawn, the true story of heroism and tragedy abroad, the can-do in the blizzard of '78, was selected by the American Library Association as one of the top books of the year and described as a white-knuckle read, the best book of its kind. Mr. Tougias enjoys the challenge of writing all types of books and has won awards for books in the categories of humor, young adult, and history. His humor and outdoor book, There's a Porcupine in My Outhouse, Misadventures of a Mountain Man Wannabe, won the Independent Publishers Association Award for the Best Nature Book of the Year. Michael also gives inspirational presentations for business groups and colleges, sharing what he has learned from the survivors and rescuers about overcoming adversity, making sound decisions, and leadership. His newest presentation, President Kennedy's Decision-Making During the Cuban Missile Crisis, is drawn from his upcoming book on the same subject titled Above and Beyond, JFK and the U-2 Pilots. Please join me in giving our guests a nice warm Wisconsin welcome.
Thank you, Colin. Good evening. As Colin said, my name is Matthew Maske. I'm the son of Ervin Maske, who was recently portrayed in the Disney movie, The Finest Hours, which was written by co-authors Michael Tougias and Casey Sherman. There are many books written about the story, but The Finest Hours is the one that Disney chose to do a movie on. Tonight, I will be telling my father's story, along with the movie experience my sister and I have had. Please excuse me if I get a little emotional at times, as I wish my father was here to enjoy the experience and find out how truly he changed others' lives. My father was born and raised in Marinette, Wisconsin, and was born on April 24th, 1929. He graduated from Marinette High School. He worked for Arnovitz's scrapyard until he had decided to follow in his older brother's footsteps and join the Coast Guard. This is where he would unknowingly be a part of the greatest small boat rescue in Coast Guard history. On February 18, 1952, he was returning from leave, headed back to the lightship he was stationed at called the Stormhorse. A lightship is basically an offshore lighthouse that is anchored to help guide boats in. He was to report to the station Chatham for a ride out to his lightship. Today would be different, as there was a great nor'easter storm that had already broken a T2 tanker in half off the shores of Cape Cod. And there was a team of Coast Guardsmen trying to rescue any survivors from the Fort Mercer. Since my father was there waiting for the storm to pass, he decided to cook for the guys and make some soup and cornbread. As they were there eating, another call came in that there was another T2 tanker split in half about 5 miles off the shore of Chatham called the Pendleton. Bernard Weber was the coxswain of the boat who was to get a crew together to see if there was any survivors. When the word came out, it was scarce of Coast Guardsmen. Bernard had Richard Livesey and Andy Fitzgerald that had to go because they were stationed there. My father overheard that they were in need of a fourth, so looked up and said, "I'll go. After all, this is what I signed up for, to save people." Out of the 4 men, my father was the only one that did not have to go. Needless to say, those words would change his life forever. The crew geared up for their journey. Keep in mind that back then there were no wetsuits or such. They had wool suits that would be soaked and then they would freeze up. As they traveled down to the pier, they were getting the boat ready. A lot of the townspeople were telling them it was nice knowing them and that they were not going to return. After all, they had to cross the bar, and once past the bar, there were 60-foot waves they had to deal with. All they had was a 36-foot motor lifeboat. Everyone told them it was a suicide mission, and they should just stay in the harbor as they couldn't get past the bar. The crew wanted no part of that. As the Coast Guard says, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. So they pushed on. As they passed over the bar, a large wave crashed into them and broke the windshield and the compass on the boat. Even that didn't stop them, as they knew there were others out there in trouble. The boat would make noises as it would climb each wave and drop off the other side. When this was happening, each time Andy Fitzgerald had to prime the motor to keep it going in order to climb up the next wave. This went on, seemed to them for forever, until they came across the Pendleton. This was huge and was bobbing up and down in the water. Andy Fitzgerald donned the spotlight as my father and Richard Liversey prepared to get survivors onto the boat. Not knowing how many were survivors, the Pendleton crew threw down the Jacob's ladder and began climbing down as each guy would climb into the large waves, which would crash the ladder against the side, and they would fall into the water. My father and Richard Liversey would grab the guys out of the water by their belts and help them out onto the rescue boat. One by one, they came down and were fished out of the water until there was only one guy left who held the Jacob's ladder for the rest. His name was George Tiny Myers. As he made his way down the ladder, a huge wave came and hit the side of the Pendleton like the others, and he fell into the water. My father grabbed a hold of him by the belt as another wave came, and he lost his grip as Tiny was a large man. This time Richard was there to help, and as Richard grabbed Tiny, another wave came and smashed the rescue boat and the Pendleton together with Tiny in between. They lost their grip, and Tiny never came back up. They searched and searched, waiting, but he never came up. They were devastated as they lost somewhere. Now it was time to head back. Not knowing which way was home, there was no compass. Bernard's experience gave him a general idea which way they needed to go. They now have 32 survivors on the boat along with themselves, making a total of 36 on the boat, designed to only carry approximately 16 at the most. They were all cold, wet, and tired, but now they needed to get to shore. They pushed on until they saw lights. When they arrived at the docks, to much of their array, the entire community of Chatham was there to greet them. This will go down in history as the greatest small boat rescue in Coast Guard history. All 4 men were given a gold life-saving medal for their heroics. My father, like many others of that era, never talked about the story. When I was in the 3rd grade, I came across a local newspaper clipping that said local man saves 32 people from boat off the shores of Cape Cod. When I asked him about it, he stated it was just something he did, not a big deal. They had a gold medal, and he showed it to me. I thought it was so cool. My hero was no longer Superman or Spider-Man. Even though I like Spidey, it was now my dad. I did try to get him to talk to my classmates and tell a story, but he wanted no part of that. Again and again I asked, and he wanted nothing to do with that. Later I would come to also find out that shortly after the rescue, my father was notified that his parents had passed away in an automobile accident. He finished up his duty with the Coast Guard and returned back to Marinette, where he worked for Miller, Sash & Dorr, and started working for the City of Marinette Department of Public Works. Then one day in 1991, while he was at work, he was delivered a book called The Lifeboat Men by Bernard Weber, which told the story about his rescue mission, and he had his name listed in it. He had brought it home, and I read the story. Nothing more would be said until we were contacted by the Coast Guard that there would be a 50-year reunion in 2002, where they would like to get the gold medal crew together. My father was unsure if he wanted to go, as it would be emotional for him. After all, it was not about the 32 that lived, it was about the one who didn't. After my sister and I talked to Dad about it, having it being a good thing, and he would get to see those guys again, he agreed to go as long as we would come with him. This was a very emotional moment for my father as I watched him meet up with the guys from that day. I remember him hugging Bernard Weber, stating we lost him as tears ran down my father's face. Bernard telling my dad, "It's all right, Irving. Let's go meet Charlie Bridges," as Charlie was a survivor and was there with his family also. We all met in Boston at the Mariners' house on the North End. We spent a few days there and then traveled to Chatham for a few more days, touring the Coast Guard station and even taking a ride in the original rescue boat that was fully restored. This also was very emotional for my sister and I, as this was the first time we heard the entire story. We could not believe what we were hearing. We got to meet the other families and made some lifelong friendships. There were people asking my father questions and interviewing him for books that they were preparing to write. It was a wonderful experience, and Dad seemed to be opening up a little bit more about the story. Such as he told me a story, but when he found out that his parents had passed away. Those of you that may not know Marinette, it's a small town, and on the other side, it's right on the Michigan border, and there's a little small airport on the other side of Menominee, Michigan. Big plane landed, press is all out there, wondering who's getting off this plane, thinking it's somebody special. Here's my dad. He says, "Hey," he got off and said, "It's just little old me." After that, we returned to Marinette, and he continued to work for Westland Bus Lines driving school bus until his passing in 2003. My sister and I have kept in touch with other families, and we were contacted in 2012 to attend a 60-year reunion in Boston and Chatham by the Coast Guard to represent our father. It was at that time that we were notified that a movie was in the works, but details were not given except for us meeting a producer. Also in the same year, we attended a commissioning of a new Coast Guard cutter called the Bernard Weber in Miami, which was dedicated to the crew. At this point, the only crew survivor was Andy Fitzgerald, as my father, Bernard Weber, and Richard Liversey had all passed away. While at the commissioning, the producer had asked us many questions and kept in contact with us. She would email and call monthly with updates, and then told us Disney had picked up the movie. Shortly after, she put us in contact with John Magaro. John Magaro was the actor who was going to portray our father in the movie. We talked to John by Skype and email mostly, but he would text if he had urgent questions. Then in November of 2014, we were invited out to Quincy, Massachusetts, outside of Boston, to watch the movie being made. My sister and I went out there for about a week. While we were out there, we met some of the actors, getting them to sign our books. It was exciting to sit down, eat dinners with them, and get to finally meet them face to face. It was surreal. We kept in contact with Dorothy Afiro, the producer, and John Magaro. The idea was to release the movie in October 2015. Then they thought April 2016. But finally, a date was set for January 2016. Over the year, we would get items in the mail from Dorothy, such as we have director's chairs, panels, we've got a scrapbook, movie posters, some of them items I have out there in the lobby on display. This was adding to the excitement until we finally got the email inviting us to the premiere of the movie in Hollywood. We did not know what to expect. Will we get to go on the red carpet? Who will be there? How many guests can we bring? So we made our flight arrangements and hotel arrangements, and then a week before we leave, we get an official invite stating it will be at the Chinese Theater and we can bring one guest with an after party at the Hard Rock Cafe. So my sister and I both invited our best friends to come with us, then found out that Disney was picking up our airfare and hotel for the weekend. We got to be on the red carpet and made it on Access Hollywood and ET Television. We stood behind Chris Pine doing an ultimate photobomb. It was an experience of a lifetime. After Hollywood, we traveled to Chatham, out on Cape Cod. After all, this is where it all began. While there, we stayed at the Chatham Bars Inn as honorary guests and signed autographs at special events that went on the entire weekend. Met many people that told the story of when they were kids in the area. I met 2 teachers that taught 6th graders at Menomee Middle School. They invited me to come back someday and talk to their students about my father. This was also the only place that actually had the rescue boat. As we came out of the premiere, the boat was outside on a trailer for all to see, and they displayed it at the Chatham Bars Inn all weekend. This has been an incredible journey, and today, the rescue boat, the CG 36500, can be seen out in Cape Cod at Rock Harbor in New Orleans. There's a wonderful group of guys who put a lot of time into restoring that boat to make sure history lives on. There are monuments across from Chatham Station that tell the story. The Coast Guard Historical Museum in Barnstable, Massachusetts has my father's uniform on display on loan from myself and my sister. The Stone Horse Lightship, which is where my dad was stationed on when he was waiting for the ride to go back, he was waiting for a ride back there, is in Portsmouth, Virginia, on display as a museum. It is now called the Portsmouth Lightship. I would like to say God bless Bernie Weber, because if it had not been for the great navigation, my father and the crew members may not have made it. I would not be here today to share this incredible story about my father, my hero, Ervin Maske. Thank you. And now my sister would like to come up and say a few words.
I want to thank you all for coming. It's so great to see all you people here and interested in this great event that we can share with you. I'm Anita. What I would really like to share with you is the experiences that I've had just by meeting the different kinds of people that we've come across. Due to this legacy of our father and the other men that were involved in the rescue and the places that we've gone, just going out to the Cape, everyone there knows what happened. And like Matt said, when we were younger, we didn't really know what happened until that 50-year reunion. That's when we heard the full story. Our dad never really talked about it ever. We knew he had a medal, we knew he did this rescue, and like he always said, it was just something I did. So there was no concentration on this big event. It was just something that I did. And everyone out there knew, when we went, they knew his name, they knew all the men, they knew what happened. It was kind of strange that someone knows your father, something that happened like that. One incident on our way out to the Cape, we were going to, I think it was the 60-year reunion, and we were with Andy Fitzgerald in a van, and we were heading out there, and we made a little rest stop at this family-owned gas station. So Matt and I get out and thought, hey, let's check it out. Andy's waiting in the van. So we go in and we walk into the office part of the gas station, and there on the wall is this commemorative thing of the rescue. There's a picture of our dad, there's a picture of the boat, there's a picture of the flag that flies on the boat, and we're just in awe, and these guys come out of the back that are fixing cars. Yeah, that was a great rescue. And we both look at each other and go, that's our dad. And they go, what? And they said, what are you doing here? And we said, well, we're going to the Cape. And then out in the van is Andy Fitzgerald. Well, they were gone. They didn't want to talk to us anymore. So they went out there and had a little chat. But it was like awesome. It's like these people know all this, and this is cool. Last summer, I had the honor of meeting one of the surviving men. His name was Ray Steele. He was, at that time, I think 19 years old. I met his daughter. She was coming through Wisconsin on a vacation, and we met at the Norski Nook in Osseo. Perfect place for pie. So she came through, and I went and met her, and we spoke about the rescue. On my side of the story, was the rescue, and this is what happened. But I had never thought of like what the other side. So her whole life growing up, her father talked about the shipwreck and what had happened to him, and how, you know, how things affected him. And it was so interesting to hear the story that her dad had told her about them waiting for the rescue and all the things they did. He had put on all of his clothes, everything that he had, and he had rain gear, boots, you know, a different life jacket, all of these other, you know, everything he owned, hat, whatever. And she had told me about that. And then if you look up there, this is the picture that for my time growing up, every time I saw this picture, that man on the front of the boat that's leaning over with the rope, I thought that was my dad. Well, I showed her the picture, and she goes, no, that's my dad. And I'm like, no. And then when she had explained to me about the gear that her dad had put everything on before he, you know, because they didn't know how long they were going to be on there, and he wanted to have everything with him, the life jacket is different. So that's the life jacket from the Pendleton. The other men have dark life jackets. So then I thought, okay, that is your dad. It's true. Then I believed her. Yeah, that was great. I also had one little story about John McGarrow, the gentleman that played our dad. Like Matt said, we had been Facebooking back and forth, Skyping and everything, and I had shown him some pictures of when our dad was that age, and so he knew what to do. One afternoon, I got this little picture on my phone, and it said, well, how do you like my Irv haircut? So he had brought in a picture of our dad to the hairdresser, and they cut his hair like that. So I thought, well, looks good, looks good. Yeah, it was great. Well, again, I want to thank you all for coming. I'm going to let Mike talk now because he has a great story, too. Thanks.
That was great to hear. Hi, everybody. Since we're talking about heroes, I would like to acknowledge my newest hero, Colin Hansen. It's not easy pulling this all together. You know, I got a glimpse of all the backroom things he has to coordinate to pull this off, and it's really amazing volunteer work for the community. But I wanted to tonight show the slides of the two real rescues so that then when you watch the movie, you can compare it, and when you read the book, you'll be able to visualize it. And before I get started, I have, Colin mentioned I'm working on a book about one of Colin's heroes, JFK, and the book is about the U-2 spy plane pilots who flew over Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And most people don't know that the Soviets used a surface and air missile to shoot down one of our pilots, Major Rudy Anderson. He was flying 13 miles up above Cuba, and it almost triggered World War III. Had Kennedy not learned so much from the Bay of Pigs and showed restraint, who knows what would have happened, because he was under tremendous pressure from the military to take action when they shot down one of our pilots. So I do a newsletter once a year, and Colin's going to pass out a little sign-up sheet if you'd like to get the yearly newsletter. The next one will be talking about this book. It's called Above and Beyond, because these pilots knew they were being tracked by Soviet radar over Cuba, and yet they still did these important missions. And then oftentimes I'm asked, well, of the different books you've written, what's your favorite? And it's so hard to pick because the topics vary. Like Porcupine in the Outhouse would be my favorite humor and outdoor type of book. That's about when I was 22 years old. I bought a cabin in northern Vermont, which Vermont looks a little bit like Wisconsin, except more hilly. And I tried to live like a mountain man for a year up there and failed miserably. So it's like Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods, that type of book. And then of the rescue books, it's probably a toss-up between The Finest Hours and a book that's dear to my heart. It's called A Storm Too Soon. And this shows the modern-day Coast Guard. So it's a good contrast to The Finest Hours, where this rescue is being done by helicopter. So in the Gulf Stream off the Carolinas, you have 3 men in a life raft. You have 80-foot waves, because the Gulf Stream's flowing this way, the wind is coming this way, it stacks the waves up. The helicopter pilot has to get the helicopter down between the troughs of each wave and then get out of there before he gets taken out by the wave and get that rescue swimmer down to these men. And I won't give away the whole story, but once the rescue swimmer is down and off the hook, now he's in trouble too. So they have another rescue they got to get the rescue swimmer as well as the 3 men. So today's Coast Guard and yesterday's Coast Guard, yeah, the technological advances are quite a few, but they still have that, motto of always prepared, but the unofficial motto, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. So what I thought I'd do is next get into showing you the slides. So it'll be like watching a movie, and I'll talk about the Fort Mercer because that wasn't in the Disney movie, and then go on to the Pendleton, and then at the end we can take 3 or 4 questions, but then I'll be outside signing books, and I'm going to stay around, so if you have questions for myself or Matt or Anita, we'll be here. So the 2 tankers, this is their location off Cape Cod, and then the dotted lines show where they drifted to, and after they split in half, right down the middle. And then X marks the spots of the 2 rescues. So I thought I'd tell you just briefly a little bit about the Fort Mercer because it's not in the movie, it is in the book. And its bow section was in tough shape. It's at a really steep angle. You could see where it broke in half. There's water coming through the bridge. And this rescue, I don't know how to phrase it, it wasn't entirely successful. They did lose a lot of men, but they also saved a lot of men. The first boat to go out was from Nantucket. These young men went out in a small 36-foot boat. Had they not found a light ship similar to the one that Ervin Maske served on, they found this Pollock light ship, those 5 Coast Guard men would have definitely perished. To send them far out to sea for the Fort Mercer, they never would have made it. But they were able to find their way to here, and the men on board the light ship got them to safety. So then now a whole 24 hours has gone by with this sinking ship, and finally a Coast Guard cutter arrives. And it's called the Yakutat. It's in the foreground there. There's some men on it. They shoot the line over. The men on the sinking oil tanker grab the line and pull the life raft to them. Then they jumped, and all 4 perished. And I wondered why. I knew they landed in the water, not too far from the life raft. Why couldn't they just swim a couple strokes? And then about 3 months ago, I was doing a talk similar to this, and somebody in the audience said, "That's my dad on the Coast Guard cutter." And I want to show you a letter he wrote to my grandmother the day after the rescue. And in the letter, he explained why they couldn't get those men. He said, just as the 4 jumped, a gust of wind hit their life raft and sent it tumbling farther away. So it was just too far for them to swim to, because you'd have the hypothermia to deal with. So right off the bat, they've lost 4 men. Then from the cutter, they put down this small 22-foot launch, and the joy of doing the book, by the way, is the research, not the writing. Everybody always says, oh, you love to write. I go, no, I don't. The writing's always hard work, lonely, but the research is a joy. You're sitting down with the people that were there, just letting them talk, let the tape recorder run, take notes, and really trying not to get in their way. So I found Gil Carmichael, who was on this launch. He said, we were so afraid, even though the waves had gone down a little bit on the second day. He said, we finally got over there. We motioned for 2 men to jump. We got them in the little rescue boat. But he said, then a wave slammed us into the oil tanker, broke our wooden ribbing, and we're taking on water. And we had to leave, even though there were 2 men left still up on the sinking oil tanker. So Gil said, he sent me this picture. He said, here we are coming back. A couple of the survivors are underneath the white blankets. And I said, what happened next? And he said, I don't remember. And I go, why? He said, well, the way they lift us back up is they lower the block and tackle down. And he said, it was swinging in the wind. He said, hit me in the head, knocked me out cold. And he said, so I was able to get on board the ship by my crewmates bringing me up. And he said, about an hour later, I woke up and I'm in my bunk, and his first thought is, I just had the most amazing dream that I rescued 2 men. And it wasn't until he went up on the deck of the ship and he looks out and he sees, there's my dream. It really did happen. And in this slide, they're sending over the life raft again. The 2 men jump and they land in it safely, but they're so hypothermic, they can't manipulate their fingers to untie the line going to the sinking oil tanker. So they're stuck. And Bill Bleakley, one of the rescuers who was on the cutter, said, our only choice was to put the cutter in reverse and hope the line snapped on the side towards the oil tanker, and then we could pull them in. And he said it was horrifying to watch because he said the tension on the 2 lines caused the life raft to go up in the air with the 2 guys hanging on for dear life. And he said we couldn't look, and then boom, the line snapped on the side towards the oil tanker. And he said we pulled them in as fast as we could. But he said by the time we got them to the ship, you see one of the survivors here, they were frozen. They were alive, but they couldn't move. So coasties had to go down by tying ropes around their waist and tie the survivors to themselves. So the Fort Mercer, you know, it's an interesting part. They could have easily made a movie about this. This is probably the first time you 2 have seen some of these slides and heard that account. But this is going on simultaneous to the Pendleton rescue. They're bringing the last man up, and look what happens. As they bring him up, somebody shouts, look, look, and they point back towards the oil tanker, and the whole thing just goes straight up in the air. And I asked the people who were there, did it flop over? And they said no. They said it went slowly down, just like the Titanic was described as going down. And this was the last shot taken before it disappeared. So you talk about luck. 48-hour rescue, it sinks just as they get the last 2 men off. So the stern section is a little bit better shape, you see here. It's not sticking so far out of the water. And there are many men on this as well. I was able to interview the radio operator of the Eastwind who got the SOS from the Fort Mercer. By the way, the Pendleton, when we get to that, they never could get out an SOS. It happened so suddenly. But in this ship, they could. So Lynn Whitmore, he's one of the men here. He's the one standing next to the man with the beard. Just a joy to work with him. And, you know, we're going back about 12 years ago when I would interview them, and many of them passed away. They never got to see the movie, which was really tough to deal with because they were so immersed with the research for the book. So Lynn said, we were on an icebreaker, and I said, what do you do if the ice is too thick to break? He said, I'll send you a slide. He said, we blow it up. And then what they do is they ride their bow up on it, and the weight of the bow cracks the ice, and they make those passageways through. He said, here we are arriving at the sinking section of the Fort Mercer. He said, we used rafts to get the men off. He said, at least they didn't have as far to jump as on the bow section. And he said, hypothermia was the issue. If they landed in the water, they're going to drown if they don't get in the life raft within a minute. You've got, maybe 2 or 3 minutes max to live in these water temperatures. And here they're pulling one of them in, and of course they bundle them up and get them below where the heat is. And then a little later they realized, well, we need more help, and a smaller, more maneuverable cutter came. And this was a challenge to research, and I told the story today to the students. It's kind of a personal story. When I started the research all the way back in 1999, just picking away at it, doing a little bit here and there, I was working in a corporate job that I was ill-suited for, so I'm thinking, I want to be a writer, but I got 2 kids, I can't just quit. How do I do this? And I thought, instead of going to the lunch breaks where everybody bitches and moans about their jobs, why not use that time, once or twice a week to run to the Boston Public Library and pull up the microfiche from newspapers from 1952 to see what the survivors had to say. And so that became my little trick. I'd run out of the office, middle of winter, no coat on, with files like I was going to a meeting, run to the Boston Public Library. The whole library staff knew me. I'd bring it up on microfiche, hit print, grab it under my arm, run back to the office. And I did that for a year and a half of skipping those lunches. Best thing I ever did, because it led to all of this. So that's what I said to the students. If you have a goal, tackle it in little steps like I did. Do some little thing to put you closer to what your dream is. And mine was, I want to see this book come to life, and I want to be a full-time author. So the person who was on that more maneuverable cutter was John Joseph, and he had passed away, but I was able to interview his son. But almost every single survivor had passed away except one, Charles Bridges. But from those newspapers, the local newspapers would interview their survivor from their readership, so you could get the first-hand account right from these old newspapers. And it was big news. It was on the headlines of the New York Times, front page of the Boston Globe for 3 straight days. And, even as far away as down in New Orleans on the front page. So that was the beauty of having these old newspapers saved all this time. 3 survivors in borrowed clothing. And they got off the men that would leave, make the bold jump from one ship to the cutter, the sinking ship to the cutter, but the last 13 men said, we're not leaving. It's too dangerous to jump. And so they took their chances staying on this section of the Fort Mercer. And in this slide, one of them's waving to the aircraft, and he's basically saying, we're okay, we're okay. And it turns out they were okay. That half a ship stayed afloat. And I talked to a coastie, and he said, I went down to Newport, Rhode Island, where they towed it in, and he said, I went out with all the media expecting these survivors to be, half dead. And he said, when we got on board this half a tanker, the survivors welcomed us with a bacon and eggs breakfast because they had power. And then the company who owned the ship got the bright idea, well, this half a ship is worth money. Let's buy a bow section from somewhere, which they did, weld the 2 together, send it back out to sea, and you'll have to read the book, but it doesn't have a happy outcome. I mean, talk about lax Coast Guard rules that they allowed them to just weld these 2 pieces and go right back out to sea, and the whole thing kind of happens over again. So now the Pendleton, we move on to that, and that's what the Disney movie focuses on. So we'll take the bow section first. Everything starts at Coast Guard Station Chatham. And, if you go down to Cape Cod on a vacation sometime, go to the Coast Guard Station, because it looks like it did back in the 40s and 50s. Here it is today. And it's right on the bluff overlooking where this whole rescue took place. So the commanding officer, Daniel Clough, he hears that, oh my God, another oil tanker is split in half. And in the movie, they kind of portray him as the bad guy, but I often thought he was in a no-win situation. You know, if he does nothing, his superiors will say, how could you let these men die on the oil tankers? But if he sends his own men out and they perish, they're going to say, why did you send them out in such a little boat in 60-foot seas? So he was in a tough position. But he first sent out Donald Bangs before he sent out Bernie and Ervin Maske. And Donald Bangs is in the light-colored hat, and these are the three men that went with him. Bernie Weber over the phone kept saying to me, are you going to put Donald Bangs in the book? And I'd say yes. And he'd bring it up again. And finally I said, why do you keep asking? And he just said, Donald Bangs was my mentor and I loved him, and he got no credit for this in the newspaper. So I want to make sure that you give him the credit in the book. Because he went out, and here's the bow of the Pendleton. He got out there and it's dark. One guy jumps, they can't get him, the waves just take him away. But nobody else comes out. And we now know there were 6 other men, including the captain. So if I'm Donald Bangs and I'm out there in the dark in 60-foot seas and nobody else is going to jump, I'm going to head back to safety. But Bangs stayed out there all night just in case he needed to rescue somebody else. And that's why nobody else jumped, so he never got the credit in the newspapers, but Bernie never forgot him. So it's happening here off Monomoy Island, which is just below Chatham. This is from the 1952 period. And now that Officer Clough turns to this guy, who's Bernie Weber. He's played by Chris Pine in the movie. And he says, Weber, pick yourself a crew. And Bernie said to me, I thought he was nuts sending me out there at night, and I'd have to go over the Chatham Bar, because that's where our boat was stationed near. And he said, I didn't want to pick 3 people, because I'd be going, you, and you, come with me, and we're probably not coming back. He said, I got lucky. They volunteered. And in this picture, there's Bernie on the left, Richard Livesey in the middle, and Andy Fitzgerald on the right. Ervin Maske's not in this photo. You'll see him later. But I was able to interview all 3 of them extensively, but by the time I was getting to interview Ervin, he had passed away. So he was the lone rescuer that I never interviewed. So that's why it was so good to hear the story from Matt and Anita. But who knows if he would have even talked to me. You know, it might have been iffy. Would he wanted to relive this? So they have to leave from the pier and get over the bar to get out to that stern section. Here's the pier. They're heading south. This is a part of the movie I really liked. You know how sometimes less is more? Like in the movie Jaws, they don't show the shark in the beginning, just the fin. That's scarier than showing the shark. Well, here in the movie, they show them approaching the Chatham Bar. They're in relatively calm water. But in the distance, the way Disney did it was you'd have silence, and then you'd hear ba-boom, and then boom. And it was the waves breaking on the bar. And that made your hair stand on end, knowing, oh my God, these guys got to go right into that. And so this is the little boat they were in. Bernie would be standing behind the windshield in the back there where the wheel was. Different paintings of them leaving. But it happens at night, so we don't have a photo of them going over the bar. So I called the Coast Guard and I said, can you send me something what it would have looked like so I can show the audience? And I thought, wow, that's pretty good. And I'm pretty sure I either showed this to Bernie or Andy, and they said that's exactly what it was like. Because we had a little searchlight, they said, so we could see a little bit. And this was taken out on the West Coast. And what happens in this incident, which is more recent, look at the wave engulf that vessel. And if you look carefully at the top, the tip of it's coming right out the top of the wave, and the curl of the wave rolls it. They all lived, thank God, because they had their surf belts on, and the boat is self-righting. So I said to Bernie, did you have your surf belts on? And he said, Mike, they hadn't even been invented. He said, I used my belt from my pants to just help tie me to the wheel so I wouldn't go over. But back to approaching the bar, what happens is their first attempt, the wave hits it so hard, it breaks the windshield, and so much water comes in through the cockpit, it picks the compass right off its mount and sweeps it away. So again, if I'm in Bernie's shoes, I would have said, okay, I tried, get the hell out of here and get back. But he tried a second time. And I wish I'd asked him this, why? Why would you do that knowing you're probably not going to make it? And even if you do make it, you're not going to find the oil tanker because you've lost your compass. And I think his answer would have been, Mike, I'd been involved in a failed rescue before and 5 men died because I couldn't get there. I think that really weighed heavily on him. And you'll see it in the book about the rescue of the Landry. So he was actually looked at by some people as incompetent, and it just goes to show what you can do to rise above that prior adversity. And the second attempt, the engine goes out, and I don't know how Andy Fitzgerald got down in that small engine compartment, reprimed it. Bernie's able to get it started just in the nick of time. They go up, 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 and get through the top of the wave like a submarine. He expected his crew to be gone, but somehow they held on. And then the next thing is, now what? How are we going to find the oil tanker? We're in these giant seas, not always breaking, thank God. Some were just big rollers. And he was very emphatic. Bernie said, if you write this book, and by the way, he didn't even want to write the book. It took some real work to get him to go along. But he said, if you write this book, put in what I'm going to tell you. And he said, I think I was guided by a higher power. He said, because there's absolutely no reason we should have found that oil tanker, no reason we should have gotten over the bar. And coming back in, he said, total luck getting over the bar, or fate. And he thinks it was a higher power. He says, too many strange things happened that night that simply cannot be explained. So they do find the oil tanker, and this is the painting done of that. And it's very accurate. Bernie was with the painter when they did it. So the men would, as Matt said, would come down that Jacob's ladder, and Bernie'd get one or two, but he couldn't stay in there because the next wave would slam him into the hull. So he'd do a circle, come back, get 2 more, keep doing that. He gets up to, say, 15. He's exceeded the capacity of the survivors compartment. By the way, when you watch the movie, they show the survivors sitting on the bow. Never would have happened. In those seas, they would have been swept off in 2 seconds. So, you know, some things in the movie they need to do for visual purposes, but it's not accurate. So Bernie has got a decision. Do I take these men back in and try to come out? I know there's a couple more up there. And he thinks, I'll never get back out here. It won't happen again. So that's when he says it's all or nothing. And in the movie, they use the phrase, we all live or we all die. The same thought. Unfortunately, he's thinking there's only 2 or 3 more, but there are a grand total of 33 men on this section of the tanker. He's only got less than half off as he exceeded the capacity of his boat. But it's going good. He's getting them. And he's down to the second to the last man. For many years, they always said Tiny Myers was the last man, but that was a made-up story by the rescuers for a certain reason. But they get to the second last man. He's as big as an NFL offensive lineman, you know, over 300 pounds, coming down. I think it was Ervin and Richard Livesey had him. Just like in this picture, you know, they got that survivor by the arms, but it's on the other side of the rescue boat. But he's too big to pull in, And so they have to stay there too long. Wave comes, wham, slams the rescue boat into the steel hull of the oil tanker, crushing Tiny Myers in between. And you'll see in the movie that scene has been changed as well. Probably for kids to keep that PG-13 rating. But Bernie's got a decision. Do we spend all night looking for Tiny Myers, who we're pretty sure is dead, or do we get the last guy on the ladder, which is played by Casey Affleck in the movie, The Engineer. And they get him safely, and then Bernie turns on the radio and he goes, "This is Bernard C. Weber. I've got 32 survivors off the Pendleton, over." And he said, "Mike, the radio exploded." I go, "It blew up?" He goes, No, it exploded with advice." I go, "What do you mean?" He said, "Headquarters is telling me what to do." He said, "Clough's telling me another thing." He said, "A cutter is telling me come 3 miles further out to sea and unload these people." He said, "A lightship's telling me come to the south." And I said, "Which one did you do?" He said, "None of them. I turned the radio off." I said, "Why?" And he said, "It's making me nervous." I said, "Don't you get in trouble for doing those kind of things, turning off the radio to a superior officer?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I did." But he said, "It was making me a wreck." He said, "I was just going to do the exact opposite of what I did coming out. Coming out, the waves were coming at me. I'm heading in, and I'm going to just go with the seas." And he said, when we got back to the Chatham Bar, he said, it was so dark, I didn't even know we were there. And we were just hurled up and over it without me even trying to do anything special with the vessel. And he said, all of a sudden we're in, 6 or 7 foot seas, and he knew he was safe. And he said that's when the tears started. So they come back to the pier, the whole town's there. The townspeople I interviewed said, we thought, oh, what a shame, they've been gone for 3 hours and they rescued one guy, the one Anita mentioned on the bow. But it's like a clown car in a parade with a hatch, and the hatch pops open, and boom, all these people start pouring out, big life jackets on. How they got 32 men either in the survivor's compartment or wrapped around Bernie's legs, back in the cockpit, nobody knows, because we've tried to do it since then. You can't fit that many people, even wrapping around each other. But as Andy said, hey, if your life's at stake, you find a way, And here's my favorite picture of the whole group. Everybody's left but Bernie and Ervin. So Ervin's standing on the lower side and Bernie's up high, and you just see the relief in their faces and the exhaustion in Bernie. His hand is limp. He can't believe it's over. And then they're taken back to the station and posed for pictures. And these are going out across the country. But I always like to joke, even a hero like a Bernie Weber makes a mistake. He forgot to zip his fly. And Bernie had a sense of humor. He would laugh at that. At the end, I'll tell you, he could be very crusty at first, but once he got to know you, he was a really warm and welcoming person and a real history lover. Really wanted to get everything exactly right. Some survivors, the flash bulbs are going off at the Coast Guard station. Live radio interviews being done. The heroes again. And it was interesting. Bernie said, I hated the label hero. And I said, why? He said there was jealousy. He said there were probably other men in the Coast Guard that had done things just as daring and never got the credit. So I could understand why there was jealousy. And he said the Coast Guard would trot me out in front of Rotary groups and have me talk as a recruiter. He said I was very uncomfortable. These guys were really young, by the way, the 4 rescuers. Bernie was the oldest at 24, 25. Andy was the youngest, I think, at 19. So these guys were young with this kind of responsibility on their back. And later, the ship did hit a shoal, and pictures were taken before it was torn apart by the waves. There's a Jacob's ladder. People would go on board and pick through, try to get valuable pieces off it. Remember I mentioned the bow and Donald Bangs, and the mystery of the book is what happened to the captain? He never came out, and those other 5 men. Well, part of it was solved when I found a gentleman by the name of Mel Guthrow. I saw his name in a Coast Guard casualty report, and it said, we ordered him out to collect the bodies. So I found Mel. He only lived a mile from my house. I couldn't believe it. He said, come over. I got pictures. So Mel took these pictures, and he said, I was getting nervous. This is days after the storm. There's no waves, but still, I didn't want to go on that ship. He said, but I approached in the pilot house through the rear there where it was all torn apart. He said there were no bodies there. I said, what'd you do? He said, I had a little flashlight. I went all through the ship, made it all the way to the forecastle, this very point of the bow. And he called it the paint room because paint had been stored there. And he said, under some burlap bags and newspaper was one sailor frozen stiff into a block of ice. I said, what about the captain and the others? He said, they were not on that vessel, so we'll never know what happened to them. Did they jump? Did they try to put their own little lifeboat overboard? Did they die when it initially broke in half because there was no radio communication from the ship? So it'll be the unsolved mystery. Their bodies were never, ever found. Good news all these years later as volunteers fixed the boat up, just like Colin, giving of their time and effort. And it was quite a project to fix this boat up. The thing was rotting away behind the Salt Pond Visitor Center on Cape Cod. Here it is, the most famous vessel in Coast Guard history. And for years, it was just sitting there rotting under the elements. And a gentleman from Orleans said, that's the 36-500. And they raised the funds, and it's afloat today. And the original propeller from it is on a big boulder overlooking the Chatham Bar up on a cliff. And I'm going to close with a little story about Bernie. First of all, he didn't want to do the book, and he said, as we're doing the work, nobody's going to buy this. You're wasting your time. And then he goes, but I know you guys, you all dream of movies, and we do. He said, if they ever make a movie, I want Don Knotts to play me. So he's got that humbleness about him. Always kept that. That's what I loved about him. And then, when he talked about how he didn't like to be a hero, and he gave this other example, he said, so 3 days after the rescue, he said, after I was scolded for turning the radio off, he said, I get a call from the commandant's office, and they said, Weber, we're giving you the highest honor you can get in the Coast Guard, the Gold Life-Saving Medal. We're going to give your crew the silver, and we're going to do the ceremony in Boston on such and such a date. And Bernie says, thank you very much. And then he goes, maybe you should give the crew the gold too, because they volunteered. He said, I was ordered, but they volunteered. And they said, no, this is all set. We're going to do it this way. And he's about to hang up the phone, and then he gets his courage up and he goes, well, you know what? If you don't give them the gold too, I won't accept it and I won't come to that ceremony. And he's telling this to the top brass in the Coast Guard. And guess what? He called their bluff, and all 4 got the Gold Life-Saving Medal as they should have. And that was Bernie Weber. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to open it up to questions, so let us know if it's directed at me or if you want to hear from Matt, and say that question nice and loud so we can all hear. Yes?
I was intrigued by the photography in your presentation, the black and white photos. Could you tell us about the origin of those? Because some of them were very specific and looked as if they'd been taken from aircraft.
They were taken from aircraft, and most of them were taken on day 2 of the rescue. So the storm had subsided, so there wasn't that sleet in the air. And a lot of the others, so those were Coast Guard, and a lot of the others were taken by a gentleman named Dick Kelsey, who heard about the rescue and rushed down to the fish pier. And he's the one that captured that image I loved of Bernie and Ervin, you know, with the relief coming off them. So those were the two primary sources for the photos. Some of the photos I thought were clearer than we can get today. Incredible. They really help with the writing of the book, because I'd look at the photo while you're writing that section to bring it alive.
Yes, I just wanted to know how you came about deciding to write about this.
Well, I had done a couple of previous rescue survival at sea books, and I stumbled upon the Coast Guard casualty report for the Pendleton and the Fort Mercer, and I was born and raised in Massachusetts, and I'm reading this and I'm going, I've never even heard of this. If I haven't heard of it, other people probably haven't. What a book. But then as I started to do the research, I realized, yeah, there's a lot about the Pendleton, but not much about the Fort Mercer. And if you just wrote about the Pendleton, it's only a 3-hour rescue, the book would be way too short. So the challenge was, how do you learn about the Fort Mercer, which wasn't written up? And that's why it took so many years of on and off. And that's why when the co-author said, hey, I'm working on the same thing, let's join forces, I said, perfect, because you can, you know, assist with the research. So that's how it all came about. But Bernie was brainwashing me. He's saying, nobody's going to buy this book. Don't waste your time. Don't fly down here. Don't do this. And I was starting to believe him. I'm like, maybe I should give up on this. So yeah, and it took some real convincing of Bernie to get him on board.
Yeah, what I'm trying to understand is the significance of your 36, the 32, and the 31. First, you were talking about the 32 and 31.
You're talking about the size of the rescue boats?
I believe it was the men.
Oh, the men. There were
must have been
33 men on the Pendleton stern. So that's the part of the rescue that Ervin Maske and Bernie was involved in. And they lost one. So they rescued 32 out of 33. Tiny Myers was the one who did not make it. That's the length of the boat, 36 feet. Yep. Okay, right in the middle there?
I hope you don't mind me taking an opportunity to suggest another book to you.
Yes.
But, as I think many of the people here may have heard of the moment a few weeks ago outside of Tokyo Bay where a destroyer was struck by a cargo ship. But just as you alluded to, I'm a 25-year Navy veteran, and these are just 18-year-old people who all of them emerge from Great Lakes Naval Training Station just south of Milwaukee. Every week there's a class that just produces sailors. The large garage doors are open and they have a ceremony. And persons who come from all kinds of backgrounds, Coast Guard and Navy, make their lives in this. And when you think of the drama, I mean, this is an incredible drama. I've been in very rough seas by the Kamchatka Peninsula, and you don't know how scary that is, but the drama that you're portraying here is similar. Just a few weeks ago, I think it is another book in the making, but it's said that a commanding officer has absolute authority in the Navy, but also absolute accountability. And so regardless, a ship of war has priority at sea, but this is a 2 o'clock in the morning event. A ship rotates, a cargo ship, and gouges the bottom of a ship and opens it up. And I'm amazed by the ballast here that kept these things afloat.
Right.
And you might comment on that too. And it just, to me, immediately my thought is, young men, 7 people die in a berthing compartment on this recent ship, and yet other very young, immature sailors have been trained to close hatches and try to keep a ship afloat, and that was achieved in a similar fashion here. There's huge openings, and yet people are trying to maintain ballast. It's just an incredible story.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the captain was asleep at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, not surprising, he has other officers that take the bridge.
Right.
But, something happens, that's a very high traffic area.
Right.
I don't mean to divert from the drama here, but
Right.
it's an echo of these things are happening all the time, and you're dealing with young people who are facing incredible.
Right. And you know,
challenge.
some of the books that I work on that they don't have heroic captains, and one would be remember the tall ship Bounty that sank in Hurricane Sandy? I have a book out there called Rescue of the Bounty. Well, that storm was so well forecast, giant mother of all hurricanes, they called it, the widest ever recorded, and yet the captain still went saying to his crew, which were all very young, we can get around it. I've done this before. So that overconfidence was in him. He had a schedule he wanted to keep. I always say to sailors, I'm always out on the ocean myself, I always say, rip that schedule up. If new information's coming in, change your plans. But he had it in his head, we're going to get around this. And the crew was very young, so he put it to, not a vote, but he said, hey, if anybody wants to get off the ship, now's your time, no hard feelings. I know you're hearing about this hurricane, but I've done this before. Trust me, we'll be safe. And to a person, they all said, we're with you, we want to go with you. And I later thought, that's the peer pressure. He did it in an open setting where nobody who's, you know, they're all in their early 20s, wants to be the one saying, I don't want to do it, I'm the chicken, I'm going to let the team down. Whereas if, you know, there's Michael Tougias on it today, I'd be like, you're nuts, I'm getting off, and I think all of the rest of you should too. But the dynamics were fascinating. So that's why a co-author and I did that book, because they're making bad mistakes, and we wanted to get into why did they make the bad mistakes. And yet the Coast Guard has to risk their lives, which they did, flying into a hurricane, and they were able to save everyone but the captain, who maybe went down with the ship intentionally, we don't know, and a woman by the name of Claudine Christian, who traced her lineage back to Fletcher Christian on the original Bounty. How eerie is that? So just an amazing story, and there's some video on my website, michaeltougias.com. You'll see the rescue swimmers going down, and all of a sudden a gust of wind hits the life raft with the people in it and flips it. So now they're trapped underneath it. Was there up here? Yep.
I have a slightly different question. It's more about the process. How does a book become a movie? What's the process around getting a producer to pick it up and that whole chain of events?
So much luck. Because I had tried for years with my other books. I'd send copies out to producers and anybody address I could find in Hollywood, and you'd never hear a thing. Well, in this case, there was one driving force behind it, and that was Dorothy Affiero, an independent producer who loved the story and said, can I pitch this to movie studios? And we said, oh, of course, we don't know how to do it. And a lot of them said no because of too expensive ocean scenes. And Disney goes, that's perfect, a real hero, 1952, so you have a period piece. And Dorothy brought her own screenwriters who she'd worked with in the past. So, you know, my involvement was very little, except with the screenwriters in the early stages. Like they would say, Miriam's home in bed with the flu. In reality, we got to make that better for the movie. What would you have her do? And I said, this really happened, but not in The Finest Hours, a different rescue that I researched, where the loved ones knew their men were lost just off the coast of Gloucester, and they took their cars and got to a big overlook and shined their headlights out to sea, hoping that they'd see the headlights and find their way in. So that's fictional in The Finest Hours. I wrote it, but it's based on a true story from another incident. But, you know, to get back to your question, it was like the stars aligned. Everything just went so well and perfect, and I think it was because of Dorothy. I've talked to other authors who have their books made. They said they never even let us on the set or talk to us or anything. So we were really blessed.
I'll be the bearer of bad news, as they've done a wonderful job. I know there's still some books out there to be signed, and I know there's people to still go and look at the tables to what Matt and Anita brought. But another round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you, Will.
And I asked purposely to have this picture up here because this is how this happens. All these logos here that you see make this happen. And there's a few that even added to that to make this happen for this summer. And so I want to take a moment to list the ones that helped extra this summer to make this event happen. As it was mentioned before, we had 3 this year, and then I added a 4th for the summer. My wife is gone, so it was okay. I voted on that, and nobody else said no, so it worked out. But really, honest and truly, you know, when I talk to the kids today and stuff like that, and when I talk around to the community, and I have people ask me, you know, how does this happen? And this is why. Central Wisconsin, Wausau, we are so blessed to have so many businesses, groups, and organizations that say yes. And not yes for this one, but yes for all of them. And yes, many years and stuff like that. I mean, 10 years we have been doing this. 10 years. This is our 10th year of bringing history to life to our students and our community. So yes, besides the ones that you see here, I'd like to say a special thanks to some others that have stepped in. BA and Esther Greenheck Foundation, NWA Matt Stifler and family, Jefferson Street Inn, NTC in the Wausau School District, the Edgar School District, Yankee Bookstore, UWMC, and Wisconsin Public Radio. So please, a round of applause for their efforts. And again, as always, it's just been a wonderful trip. It's been a wonderful opportunity to hang out with Matt and Anita and Michael. And so please, I'm going to send them off the stage into the hallway to sign books, to answer questions. So please enjoy their company as much as I did. And thanks again for coming. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening and weekend with Chalk Fest and the Balloon Festival and stuff like that. Keep your eyes and ears open. November 8th, we'll be celebrating Veterans Day with a story from the Korean War. And the group is the 65th Infantry. And that'll be our 8th Congressional Gold Medal story to come to town. So pretty cool that we've been able to do that. So keep your eyes and ears open for Veterans Day. And then also in March, we will have Sharon Robinson, daughter of Jackie Robinson, to come and share her story. So we are doing great things here. So thanks again. Have a great night.